Imagine standing at the edge of a continent you have never seen before. No roads, no maps, no names for the rivers, the mountains, the valleys stretching endlessly before you. Just land. Wild, ancient, and completely unknown. For thousands of years, the people of Europe looked west across the Atlantic Ocean and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. They told stories, they dreamed, some of them prayed, and then a few of them sailed. What they found would change everything, not just for Europe, not just for America, for the entire human race. These are the men who dared to explore the greatest land on earth, the ones who walked into the unknown with nothing but a compass, a dream, and an almost reckless refusal to turn back. These are the greatest explorers of America. The year is 1492. A 41-year-old Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus stands on the deck of a small wooden ship called the Santa Maria and stares at an horizon that no European cartographer had ever drawn. He had promised the Spanish crown gold, spices, a new trade route to Asia. What he found instead was something no one in the known world had imagined. On October 12, 1492, after 36 days at sea with a crew on the verge of mutiny, Columbus spotted land. He called it San Salvador. He believed he had reached the East Indies. He was wrong, magnificently, historically, world-changingly wrong. What Columbus had found was the Bahamas, the edge of a continent so vast, so rich, and so completely unknown to the European world that it would take another century before anyone truly understood what he had discovered. Columbus did not discover America. Millions of people already lived here. What Columbus did was connect two worlds that had existed in complete ignorance of each other for 10,000 years. That is not a small thing. That is the beginning of everything. Columbus had opened a door, and through that door came the Spanish conquistadors. In 1513, just 21 years after Columbus first landed, a Spanish explorer named Juan Ponce de León sailed north from the Caribbean and became the first European to set foot on what is now the United States of America. He called it La Florida, the land of flowers. Legend says he was searching for the Fountain of Youth, a mythical spring said to restore the youth of anyone who drank from it. Whether that legend is true or not, what is certain is that Ponce de León found something far more valuable than eternal youth. He found a continent. But it was another Spaniard, Hernando de Soto, who would venture deeper into America than any European before him. Between 1539 and 1542, de Soto led 600 soldiers on an extraordinary and brutal march through what is now Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and became the first European to cross the mighty Mississippi River. De Soto's expedition was not a journey of wonder, it was a conquest. His soldiers enslaved Native Americans, burned villages, and left a trail of suffering across the continent. The glory of exploration has always carried a shadow, and De Soto's story is one of its darkest chapters. He died on the banks of the Mississippi in 1542. His men buried him in the river he had discovered, afraid the Native Americans would desecrate his body if they knew their tormentor was dead. The land he marched through had no name on any European map. Today, we call it the American South. 100 years after Columbus, Spain had claimed the South, France had claimed the North, and England, determined not to be left behind, sent its own men west. In 1607, 3 small ships carrying 104 English colonists landed on the swampy banks of the James River in Virginia. They called their settlement Jamestown. It was the first permanent English colony in America, and it nearly killed every single one of them. Disease, starvation, conflict with the Powhatan Confederacy. By the winter of 1609, known as the Starving Time, only 60 of the original settlers were still alive. Desperate men did desperate things to survive. Jamestown came within days of being abandoned forever. What saved it was a man named John Smith. Smith was a soldier, an explorer, and one of the most extraordinary personalities in American history. Blunt, fearless, and absolutely impossible to intimidate, he imposed order on a colony on the brink of collapse. His famous rule, "Those who don't work, don't eat." Smith explored and mapped the Chesapeake Bay with extraordinary detail, maps so accurate that they were used by navigators for over a century after his death. He gave New England its name. He wrote tirelessly about the possibilities of the American continent, urging settlers to come, to plant, to build. John Smith never became rich. He never governed a great colony. He died in England in 1631, largely forgotten by the very civilization he had helped create. But without him, the English experiment in America might have ended in a Virginia swamp, and the United States of America might never have existed at all. By the mid-1700s, the eastern seaboard of America was settled. Towns were growing. Farms were spreading, and a new generation of Americans, born not in Europe but on this continent, began to look west. Past the farms, past the settlements, past the last known road, toward the great wall of mountains that stood between them and the unknown interior of a continent, the Appalachian Mountains. And the man who would lead America through them was a farmer's son from Pennsylvania, named Daniel Boone. Boone was not a general, not a politician, not a nobleman. He was a woodsman, a hunter who felt more at home in the wilderness than in any settlement. He had been exploring the forests since he was a boy, and by his 30s he had developed a knowledge of the American frontier that no map could contain. In 1775, the same year the American Revolution began, Daniel Boone led a party of axemen through the Cumberland Gap and blazed the Wilderness Road into Kentucky. 300 miles of trail hacked through mountains and forest, opening the American interior to settlement for the first time. Within a few years, tens of thousands of settlers had followed that road west. Kentucky was no longer a wilderness on the edge of a map. It was home. Boone himself was captured twice by Native Americans, escaped once, and was adopted into a Shawnee tribe on another occasion. He lost a son to conflict on the frontier. He lost land to legal disputes. He lost nearly everything, multiple times, and kept going west anyway. Daniel Boone didn't just explore America, he embodied it. The restlessness, the hunger, the refusal to stay still that would drive this nation from the Atlantic to the Pacific. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of the United States overnight with the Louisiana Purchase, 800,000 square miles of land, and almost no one in Washington knew what was in it. Jefferson needed to know. He chose two men for the most ambitious exploration in American history: Meriwether Lewis, his own personal secretary, a soldier and naturalist, and William Clark, Lewis's old Army friend, a skilled mapmaker and outdoorsman. Their mission? Find a route to the Pacific Ocean, map everything, document every plant, every animal, every river, every tribe, and come back alive. On May 14, 1804, the Corps of Discovery set out from Camp Dubois in Illinois with 33 people, a keelboat, 2 pirogues, and supplies for 2 years. They were heading into territory that no American and almost no European had ever mapped. What followed was 8,000 miles, 2 years and 4 months, across the Great Plains where buffalo herds stretched to the horizon, over the Rocky Mountains, higher and more brutal than anything their maps had suggested, down the Columbia River to a shore where Lewis wrote in his journal simply, "Ocean in view. Oh, the joy." Along the way, Lewis and Clark encountered more than 50 Native American nations, some welcoming, some hostile, most simply trying to understand who these strange men were and what they wanted from their land. A Shoshone woman named Sacagawea joined the expedition as a guide and interpreter. She was 16 years old, pregnant, and arguably the most important member of the entire Corps of Discovery. Without her knowledge of the land, her relationships with the tribes, and her calm in moments of crisis, the expedition would have failed. Lewis and Clark returned to St. Louis in September 1906 to a hero's welcome. They had mapped a continent. They had documented over 300 species unknown to science. They had shown that the American West was not a desert, but a garden. Within 50 years, settlers would follow their trail all the way to the Pacific. The American century, the one that would make this nation the most powerful on earth, began on the banks of the Missouri River with 2 men and a dream that reached all the way to the ocean. After Lewis and Clark, the West was open, but it was not yet known, not fully, not in the detail that settlers needed to survive it. That work fell to a young Army officer named John C. Frémont, known as the Pathfinder. Between 1842 and 1854, Frémont led 5 major expeditions through the Rocky Mountains, the Oregon Trail, California, and the Sierra Nevada, producing the maps and reports that guided hundreds of thousands of settlers westward during the great migrations of the 1840s and 1850s. His reports were not dry scientific documents. They were written like adventure stories, vivid, romantic, full of the drama and beauty of a continent being discovered in real time. Ordinary families in Ohio and Missouri read them by firelight and decided to pack everything they owned into a wagon and head west. Frémont's maps guided the Oregon Trail. His surveys helped open California just in time for the gold rush of 1848 that would bring 300,000 people west in a single decade. The frontier that once seemed infinite was closing, and America, from sea to shining sea, was finally, fully explored. What do we owe the explorers? They gave us the maps, the names, the routes, the knowledge that made a nation possible. Columbus opened the door. The conquistadors pushed through it, sometimes with terrible violence. John Smith held the first English foothold together through sheer force of will. Daniel Boone showed a restless people that the mountains were not a wall, but a doorway. Lewis and Clark revealed a continent of staggering beauty and possibility, and Frémont drew the maps that brought it within reach of ordinary people. But exploration is never a simple story. For every explorer who found a new horizon, there were people already living on that horizon. People with their own histories, their own maps, their own names for the rivers and mountains that the newcomers claimed to be discovering for the first time. The greatest explorers of America were extraordinary human beings, brave beyond measure, driven by curiosity and ambition that most of us will never know. They were also men of their time, shaped by the beliefs, the prejudices, and the hunger for conquest that defined their era. To understand them fully, we must hold both truths at once: the wonder and the cost, the discovery and the loss, the maps they made and the worlds they unmade in the making. America was not empty when the explorers arrived. But because they came, it became something entirely new. Something the world had never seen before. Something that is still, even now, being explored.